Well, hello and welcome to the Unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about all things Unreal and also giving an F about your 3D printer. As always, we're your hosts. My name is Alex, and this is not Jacob. Who are you?
Well, you may remember me from such podcasts as the podcast we're on now. I'm Vikas Reddy, founder and CEO of Light Twist. Was on this podcast about, I don't know, 10 episodes ago. What was the
It
last episode?
feels
But
like
yeah,
100 years ago. Yes, yes, of
yeah,
course, because
uh,
right. I mean, in the infinite history of this podcast, you were one of our early guests. Yes, yes. Welcome
yeah.
back. Thank you for being here. Right, because Jacob, of course, is so burned out from GDC. We will have to await his full report in a future episode. But yes, thank you so much for being here to fill in
Yeah.
and be a guest host for tonight.
I'm super pumped to be here, and yeah, we're excited to be powering this virtual studio experience. We're still using some alpha software here, but hopefully it does not crash.
I got to say, the interface of this new alpha software looks fantastic. It's really coming along, and it's been a joy and a pleasure to watch it develop over the past few months.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, shout out to the Light Twist team that's been doing like crazy work to pull this off. And yeah, we've got a lot more to go, but it's getting there.
Yeah. So I thought for today's episode, we could do kind of a deep dive into South by Southwest. And it might surprise some people to know that Unreal Engine had anything to do with South by Southwest, but we can go over that and maybe touch on just a smattering of GDC things before Jacob does a deeper dive into them when
Yeah,
he returns. Does that sound good?
that sounds awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll
Great.
start with just highlight. We'll touch on some of the best, maybe some of the most interesting, let's call it Unreal or game engine related concepts or things that you saw at South by, because it seems
Mhm.
like that's happening more and more at South by now. There's a lot more spatial computing, game engine stuff than it used to.
Yeah, for those who don't know, South by, of course, started just as a music festival, and over the years they've added other tracks, and so now they have the interactive track, which includes a lot of XR content, which is pretty cool. And I do appreciate you saying just game engine related content, because if we tried to just do things that are Unreal Engine, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, because there are quite a few experiences where I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure if it was made in Godot or what CryEngine or Unreal or Unity. So we'll just talk about the cool ones.
Yeah, sounds awesome. So yeah, what were some of your favorites?
Yeah, so let's start with one I saw by Amaze VR. If that company sounds familiar to people, it's because they got a lot of press for doing Megan Thee Stallion Enter the Hottyverse, which also toured across AMC theaters, and that was a combination experience of seeing stereoscopic 3D video inside of a CG Unreal Engine environment. And so they had a new experience at South by this year. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was a K-pop band, and it was bar none the best 3D video experience I've ever had in VR. I can't explain how sharp it was.
Yeah, it sounds like so it was like a 360, not fully three. I mean, I haven't seen anyone do that yet, like a full 3D video kind of thing, but it was like a 360 stereo experience essentially.
Yeah, and actually, I think one of the reasons they were able to crank the resolution so high was they actually kept it 180. They did kind of a clever effect where the edges of the video kind of like dissolved away as though they were being pulled away by a black hole, and then
Hmm.
everything in front of you in the 180 experience was incredibly sharp. And I think that was helped by the fact, well, a few things. I got to chat with the team afterwards, and they have a totally custom camera rig. I thought they were maybe using like the Canon fisheye dual lenses. Nope, not those. Something that I think they said starts at 18K, not for price, the resolution, and then they scale it down to something like 6 or 7K to be viewable in the Quest. But also the camera experience is always moving. And so sometimes you're very close to the performers and they look super sharp. Now, Vikas, what do you think tends to happen sometimes to people if they're being moved in VR against their will?
Yeah, I mean, like I would expect to be throwing up basically because that's the usual,
Yeah.
like you get dragged around. So yeah, like did you throw up?
No, I did not throw up. In fact, I couldn't believe how comfortable it was. And I saw a number of people go through this experience who said, usually I can't stand a 360 3 DOF video. Three DOF, by the way, stands for 3 degrees of freedom. I know you know that. I want to make sure our audience knows that. And that just
Yeah.
means all you can do is rotate your head. You can't actually move around. And a lot of people who went through this experience said that felt totally comfortable to me, which seems completely against the grain of what wisdom
Yeah.
has taught us over these years, where if you're moving in VR and you're not controlling that movement, you are probably going to feel ill. So there's some kind of black magic going on in how they're moving the camera, and the fact that it feels totally comfortable and gives you this very dynamic music video experience on these live performers in a CG Unreal Engine environment.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I mean, I would. Yeah, and it was what headset was that on?
It was on a MetaQuest, just a standard Quest 2. Yeah, and
Nice.
it felt really good. The experience, they did 2 music videos. They were both filmed in one take. There were no cuts. It was just one
Wow.
continuous movement. I understand they filmed it something like 5 or 6 times, but then they literally just picked the best one and composited it all together. And the performers are looking at you the whole time. You feel very, very seen. And
Mm.
I just found it incredibly compelling and engaging, and especially thinking about what the future of that might be with, making that live, for example. I know they've already cut down on their production time significantly. I think it only took them 2 weeks to go from having the raw video here to actually putting it inside their experience. And so I think the Megan Thee Stallion one was much longer, like 8 or 12 weeks. And if we keep following this trajectory, eventually I'm sure we'll get to the point where they'll be like, yeah, we can actually do this pretty much live. Maybe there's like 5 or 10 second delay, which is also like what Twitch does, and Vimeo. So that would be pretty cool. And then to have some kind of way to share that experience with other people. Because especially compared to something like, let's say, Horizon Venues, which I would not call a good video experience, or social one, sorry. This was just on a completely other plane of existence.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What else? What else caught your eye at South by?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed that I don't have the names of these things offhand, and I'm too lazy tonight to actually pull up the titles of everything. There was an experience by Target 3D, who's a really wonderful production studio out of London. I've been to their studios before, and they were doing a live dance piece. They had literally, I know this was an Unreal Engine because they actually had the Unreal Engine editor pulled up, and it was a dual piece. It was 2 performers. The one there in Austin was had prosthetic limbs for her legs, and then was performing in this very amazing choreographed way with the other performer in London, who may have also had prosthetic limbs. It was a little hard to tell from the video, but they're basically doing a live dance choreography session across the pond. And the motion capture happening in Unreal, it wasn't just your standard, like, oh yes, now I'm going into different avatars. They actually had the avatars shifting into, like, now I'm a spider with too many limbs, and now I'm a like a blob
Yeah.
of jello. And you still understood that their movements were dictating what was happening in Unreal Engine the whole time, but it was a really playful and interesting experiment with both how you could choreograph something for non-traditional bodies, but also the fact that it was happening across these continents was also very, very cool. And there were a bunch of experiences at South by this year that I appreciated because they felt like they were going against the grain of what you would traditionally see in terms of just like, hey, we're taking a narrative and making it VR because we can. There's a piece called Town Square that I know won some awards at Venice last year. This was like little animatics all around you, and you're watching like a couple thousand years of this civilization growing and dying all around you. And there's funny parts and tragic parts and horrifying parts. And it was all hand drawn. And the actual artist who made the piece was there the whole time, also sketching things out and putting them up on the wall. And yeah, that was a super, super cool team. There was a piece that I actually get to claim like a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of helping out on. There's a gentleman there named Cameron who created a piece called Body of Mine, which also won a special award there. And he had reached out to me months ago when I started playing with using the MetaQuest Pro and Unreal Engine for body capture and facial capture, because this experience is about gender dysphoria and feeling uncomfortable in your own body and understanding the trans experience better. And he was
Mm.
basically saying over Twitter, like, hey, Alex, we're having some trouble here with like the motion capture and all that. Can you help us out? And I tried to give them some good pointers and tell them that I thought the experience they were building sounded phenomenal and I couldn't wait to
Yeah.
see it. So it was such a pleasure to get to meet Cameron and his team at South by and do the experience, which I appreciated so much for. One major reason that jumped out at me is it really leaned into the uncanny valley of doing motion capture that isn't perfect. because this was set up with a bunch of Vive trackers and like a Vive Pro Eye and some eye tracking and all that. And
Yeah.
you're in a mirror the entire time. You're in an Unreal Engine environment. You're inside like a chest cavity, and you're looking at a mirror of yourself. And
Oh,
you're
interesting.
very aware the entire time that like that's not me. Not only is that not me, but also my arm and my legs don't quite move the way that mine do. And so it's a little unsettling and a little uncomfortable. And they really leaned into that. And I think it made the experience all the more effective for like, oh, this is what it feels like to be uncomfortable in my own body.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it was like so you would basically see like different gender or different size, you know, like sort of essentially a different body than your own, and then giving you a chance to kind of experience that, I guess, like, yeah, gender dysphoria or body dysphoria. I'm not sure if I'm
Yeah,
using that
yeah.
term properly, but yeah.
I know, and I always confuse the words dysphoria
Yeah,
and dysmorphia, which is
that's right.
also
Yeah,
different.
dysmorphia maybe. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Um,
fascinating.
yeah, and what was very cool was, it's all these different metahumans, and of course we all know with metahumans it's very easy to create a lot of variations and still use the same rigging and the same skeletal structure to uh, make it, even on, I think this had a relatively low budget to still be able to show all these different characters. And there was this other element where you would touch different parts of your body, and then you would hear stories of different trans individuals talking about their experience with, having breasts or having a period or having their hair, or something about them that just felt completely wrong for who they fundamentally feel like who they are. And so, a lot of people push back on the idea of VR being a quote unquote empathy machine, but I thought this actually went a very long way toward helping me as an individual understand the trans experience a little better. And so for that, I applaud Cameron and his whole team. And it was really wonderful to see something like that used VR really well.
That's awesome. So yeah,
Yeah.
what else was on your list?
Yeah, Felix and Paul. Only Paul. I'd never met them before. Paul, by the way, has a very funny email, which I'll tell you off mic. It's not Paul at felixandpaul.com. But Paul was there showing their Space Explorers experience, which is stuff they filmed with their cameras up in the International Space Station. There's something out in San Francisco right now called not Interstellar. It's called, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's basically a big arena scale VR experience where you walk around a life size, virtual model of the International Space Station. And then you kind of dip your head into different places where you get to see those videos, which, by the way, are available for free inside
Hmm,
the Oculus store. And so he was showing that experience. And then also they had a Magic Leap 2 experience that apparently they started working on back on Magic Leap 1. It kind of got shelved during the pandemic. And this was a very, very cool storybook experience. And it's totally a coincidence. I have a book with me right now, but hopefully I can demonstrate that it was so cool that you had your Magic Leap glasses on. And then as you opened up the book, it was kind of like a pop-up book, but with
hmm.
these 3D models, these animations. There was physics, so if you'd start to turn the book, like some things would like roll off the pages. And I also really appreciated that from a docent perspective, it'd be very easy to know how much longer someone has in the experience, because not only can you see like what page they're on, but also it's useful because you can do the experience at your own pace. There's a lot of VR experiences that I want to dip into for a couple minutes, and then I'm kind of like, I got it, and I don't need to stay in there, and I feel bad if I'm taking up a slot that someone else would like to be in. So this experience really allowed me to go like page 1, page 2, like just kind of glance at everything going on in there. And instead of taking up a full 25 minutes, I took up like 3 or 4 minutes, and I saw what was on every page, and I got a pretty good feeling for it without getting the whole narrative. But I thought it was a really wonderful take on how to do that.
That's awesome. That's and each page was like a different sort of VR experience as part of like tied together with the narrative.
Yeah, and to be clear, AR because Magic Leap, but yeah, so it
Oh
was
yeah, yeah,
showing
sorry,
different
yeah, yeah.
content on the pages, and you had this physical book that you were using to move the story
Kind of
along,
key it.
and there were like little fiducial markers or QR codes on there to tell the headset what to put on each page. So that was very cool, and yeah, I just thought it was a lovely storytelling mechanism. And they weren't even in the exhibit hall; they were just doing this outside in the hallway. And by the
That's
way,
neat.
this is a pretty good bridge to it was such a funny coincidence that they were there. And I got to talk to Pierre, who's also on the Felix and Paul team, about how they did their experience in San Francisco, because in addition to South by Southwest and speaking on two panels, which we'll cover in a little bit, I was primarily in Austin to work on this crazy large VR arena scale Unreal Engine experience setup. And we were using the Felix and Paul experience in San Francisco primarily to, as a precedent to say, like, how can you get a lot of people into VR into one experience? Now, what's different
Yeah.
about this custom VR arena facility that we were part of building in Austin, which is still ongoing now. And I feel very bad that I've left two of my team members in Austin since March 6th. They're still there. We're almost in April now, but they're doing a great job continuing to build out this system from a hardware, software, storytelling perspective, all that. But in San Francisco, the Felix and Paul experience uses something called anti-latency for tracking, which is all these IR markers on the ceiling. And it basically creates a big, unique fiducial marker where, as the headset looks around with this little radio on top, it's able to know where it is, what its coordinates should be in space, because it's so unique, and it can say, yes, I'm right here. And that would have worked great. We set it all up in a temporary space. We were referencing what Felix and Paul had done, and it would have been fine, except the location that we ultimately moved all this to is basically in a big party tent. And the party tent sways in the wind. It's up on a bit of a cliff. And Vikas, what do you think happens when the coordinate system for your VR experience is swaying back and forth?
I'm gonna guess throwing up a little bit there.
You would be right. Yes, the entire world shakes around you, even if you're completely still. So we kind of had to abandon that. And then we had to figure out, okay, what else could we use? Can we use spatial anchors or shared spatial anchors from Meta? No, not really, because Meta not only has kind of abandoned their efforts to make desktop experiences work, they also don't do a great job keeping up with Unreal Engine. So most of the Unreal Engine things we wanted to use were in an Oculus fork of like 4.27.
Hmm.
Spatial anchors were like super glitchy and jittery. And as much as it would have been great to be able to have this big arena scale experience like that, that would have, not worked. So ultimately, where we are now is we're using OptiTrack, which is traditionally a motion capture system, and that
Hmm.
motion capture system is being used to try to track where all these headsets are in the space. But here's the thing. One thing we really do like about the MetaQuest experience, especially in an Unreal Engine scene that is running using Airlink on RTX 4090s with triple bounced ray tracing, which sounds insane. You should not be doing that in VR. The frame rate is pretty low, but the reprojection that happens with space warp and time warp from Meta actually
Yeah.
really makes it a comfortable experience. And so we didn't want OptiTrack or anti-latency or any other system telling the headset where to be every frame. Instead, we try to do like a little check-in and be like, hey, God, where am I right now? And then we kind of want to just get like a quick little nudge back to our
Hmm.
proper coordinates in this multiplayer experience. So you see everyone else in the correct place too, and you're not bumping into them. But then we want to let the meta, software take over and let us just kind of walk
Yeah.
organically in this
So
giant space.
there, just to clarify a bit, maybe for the listeners, like what you're describing
Yeah.
is like there's the OptiTrack system you're using for essentially sort of like global positioning, like world positioning, and then as a way to also like ensure that you're not getting drift and you're able to coordinate positions between all the different people. But then using the still relying on the Quest tracking for essentially like low latency, real time, local tracking. So you're just kind of getting like all the built in sort of time warp, yeah, like reprojection, that kind of stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it. And the thing is, we found surprisingly that in the space that's been built there, you can, what the test we would do, the simple one is we pull up Airlink, pull up the menu, make sure the menu is like at a corner on a wall or something like that. We'd walk around the whole space, takes like a couple minutes to get all the way back to where we'd start, and we'd say, "Oh,
Yeah.
hey, there hasn't been that much drift. It's like a couple inches off, and that's totally livable, even though there are some, physical elements in the space that we need to align with the virtual world. But
Right.
because there can be some drift, we do want that check-in. We want to say, hey, OptiTrack, where should I be? And get those
Yeah.
little nudges. The problem is OptiTrack, like many of these systems, Vicon and others, are designed for tracking things in motion. And if you hold still and you say like, hey, where am I? it's not going
Yeah.
to give you the best reading. It's going to be a little bit jittery. But also, if you try to do it while you're in motion, you end up with like a little bit of latency where the coordinates haven't quite caught up with where you are, and it's going to think you're
Mm,
like a few inches behind you. So these systems really are designed to be on all the time. And we're flouting the authority of them by saying, like, hey, we only want to ask you where we are every so often. So it's an ongoing, interesting, challenging problem because,
yeah.
there's a few things here that are a little bit unprecedented. Normally, people wouldn't be doing this arena scale experience with Airlink, with all these dedicated Nighthawk routers that we're using. They would just be, in the headsets doing some kind of shared multiplayer system standalone. The Airlink system is tricky. The fact that we are trying to only check in with these systems once in a while instead of doing like a sensor fusion setup, which is again something you normally do with OptiTrack, where you're kind of mixing the data you're getting live from OptiTrack with the data you're getting live from the Quest. That's unusual. Ray tracing for any kind of VR is unusual, and the fact that we have so much of it in here is kind of crazy. So
Yeah.
I bring all this up first of all because it's an Unreal Engine project and has some interesting challenges, but also like you're going to ask me like, hey, tell me more things you saw at South by Southwest. And we're
Yeah.
almost done. Like we're almost done with the actual things that I saw at South by because I did spend so much time in Austin for the 10 days I was there on
Wow.
site,
10 days.
working on everything over there. Because we arrived in Austin a few days early, March 6th, and then South by didn't start till March 10th. And the original thought was like, we'll be done before South by, and then we can all go off and just enjoy South by Southwest. And best laid plans of mice and men, I still have two team members who were there a month later, cranking things out and
This
trying to
is
get from 98% done to 99% done to 100%
yeah.
done.
And this is like a challenge of we'll say one of the interesting aspects of spatial computing, computer vision, like anything that really interfaces with the real world is there's a lot of stuff where like if you're programming something where it's like it's a video game, it's only running on a desktop, that's already a hard problem. That's
Yeah.
that's challenging. There's a lot of 3D. But then when you have to like start to take into like we're into account real world conditions of like what does the environment look like and all of these things, it's like it starts to get pretty crazy. So yeah, I've been yeah, it's it's something you have to kind of account for, but it's hard to account for. So totally get why your team members are still there.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's this question of like, where's your ground truth reference? Like, what do you use as your baseline information? And you would think that when
Yeah,
you have all these systems in place, that would help you triangulate between them. But the truth is that like yeah, I mean, if we were using all three systems, that might be okay because we could do like a use the 2 out of 3 that are closest. But you actually can't have anti-latency and OptiTrack and meta tracking on at the same time. So instead, we end
yeah,
up with this thing where if we're using two systems, we're just getting very different data from both, and there's not a very clear way to say, hey, this one's probably correct. Lean more towards this one. So
yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting problem, still unsolved, but we've done some really cool 3D printing with custom head mount things. We also printed a very cool thing that goes into the headphone jack of the MetaQuest Pro and covers the power button because people all the time will accidentally press the power button and turn off the headset as they're putting it on. We've put a stop on that, so that was like a nice little clever solution. And yeah, we've done some fun testing of things like spatial ops, some other things that like use shared spatial anchors, Space Pirate Arena, just to see how other things perform in a space that large. But it does feel like we're in kind of new territory.
That's great. That's awesome. All right. So you mentioned there's one last thing that you saw before we. I am really excited to hear about your talks because and I think that's. But let's hear about the last thing that you saw that was a highlight.
Yeah, I've been holding this because this is my reminder for it. So this is a little putter that you can put a Quest controller into, and I was invited to a Walkabout Mini Golf breakfast. Walkabout Mini Golf is a lovely little game on Quest that has all these adorable worlds, different IP stuff from like Myst and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and all sorts of other things. And they had a big announcement about doing a collaboration with Meow Wolf and having both a virtual course that they've helped design and like a physical ARG kind of version of it as well. And so to actually go around a real golf course that had some nods toward the Walkabout Mini Golf game was a really nice, fusion of like the virtual becoming real. And the whole team was there and they were lovely and they were serving super delicious breakfast tacos. I'm sure a lot of
Nice.
people in our audience already know that the food in Austin is incredible.
Yeah.
So that was great. Yeah. The
Awesome.
3D printer thing, by the way, before I forget, I just want to mention that some of these late nights were fun. We ended up asking ChatGPT some questions to help us with Unreal. That was cool. But then we started to ask it things like, "Hey, ChatGPT, can you give us a rap about why virtual reality and 3D printers are so cool?" And it came up with a pretty good one that was like, you can be in places you couldn't even imagine, and I can go to Paris and I can go over here and everyone will think I'm over there. And it was like a very cute little rhyme. And then Marshall on my team said something like, "Okay, now can you do it like Eminem?" Or maybe
Yeah.
Jay Z or something like that. And then it started again with like, "I don't give an F about your 3D printer." And then like it immediately rewinded and was like, "No, can't process." Which I thought was kind of amusing that it stopped itself, but immediately went from like, "Can you make this cool thing? Yeah, I can make this cool thing," to being like, "I don't care about your cool thing."
Yeah.
That was
That's
pretty
awesome.
fun. Yeah. So talks. So I started
Yeah.
giving on two panels. One was about XR and live events, theater, and one was about XR and like architecture and places and virtual spaces. And they
Nice.
were completely different panels and both
Yeah.
lovely. And I initiated both of these panels during the proposal phase last year. And I specifically thought, like, I bet March is going to be a really busy month for me. I don't want to have to do a bunch of preparation for South by Southwest. Let's
Yeah.
do panels because I can just
Yep.
show up and talk and it'll be easy. No,
Yep.
because everyone on both of those panels is super smart and ambitious, and they all had great ideas for like all the ways the panels could be prepared for maximum efficacy. The first one, the theater one, was on the XR track. This was with Emmy Schwab and Stephanie Riggs and Louise Lascelles, and we covered this wide gambit about what is liveness in a virtual experience, in a real
Hmm.
experience, what happens when you merge them, what makes an AR experience compelling versus a VR experience. And we had
Yeah.
this whole thing planned out with Emmy as well, pretending that they couldn't attend the show and doing a quote unquote pre-recorded video saying, hey, here's the prompts I just wanted to give, and then actually showing up and being actually live. And then there were technical difficulties that made it so we couldn't play the video. So then Emmy was like off stage pretending that they weren't actually there, but still doing kind of a similar thing. And it all kind of worked because, again, the whole discussion was like how theater and live events, it's a tight wire act. And part of the fun of it is if things do go wrong, how do people respond to it going wrong, both the audience and the performers? And
Yeah.
it was a very, very cool discussion where we had like some slides and hit on particular points about case studies that we had worked on, case studies from other cool folks like Jules Jobin. I was talking about their piece, La Comédie Virtuelle, that I saw virtually in Venice a few years ago, and that was just a very cool, wide ranging discussion about compelling
Yeah.
virtual performances.
Yeah. And like, were there anything like were there any highlights where you were like from that where you're like, wow, it's a really interesting way. Obviously you've been in the space for a long time with having you, and so like, were there any like nuggets that came out of that where you're like, wow, it's a really interesting way to think about live performance in this like XR world? Yeah, what were some of the sort of nuggets of insight or wisdom?
Yeah, Louisa is someone that I've only met recently. She was working at Zero Space as their like principal creative technologist for a while, and she has like 5 degrees across like Denmark and NYU and ITP and all this about
Awesome.
body ownership and empathy in VR and what makes something really feel exciting and live. And some of the work she was discussing was really phenomenal, and I feel like I shouldn't even try to describe it because I'm going to mess it up. But I do want to tell people that both of the panels I was on are actually available kind of in podcast form. You can go to the links for those panel discussions on the South by South website. I don't think you
Cool.
need to have like a badge or anything like that. And you can play it back and you can hear all the smart things Louisa and Stephanie and Emmy said without me butchering them through my own paraphrasing based on memories from a few weeks ago.
Nice. And did you apply the classic panel strategy to make it more interesting of starting an argument with anyone?
It's funny. Both of my panel groups, we talked so much about how it's so boring when everyone agrees with each other on the same thing. So yes,
Yeah.
we did intentionally try to set up moments of conflict, and
Yeah.
this question of like, is this really live, lend
Yeah.
itself very naturally to me, for example, talking about doing the Orchard, this piece with Mikhail Baryshnikov we did last summer, and how so much of the things that people saw in the Unreal Engine experience were not live. They were pre-recorded, but there was still a
Yeah.
sense of liveness because everyone was experiencing it at the same time. There was co-presence. And yes, we tried to position certain discussions like that where someone could say like, well, here's the reasons that's not live. And one of us could say, well, here's the reasons it is. And I thought it was a very healthy, respectful debate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Full disclosure, we did rehearse, and so I think we had some idea of what the other person was going to say. It was a bit of a performance, but I think it went off very well.
Nice. And so
Yeah.
yeah, and so you mentioned you were on another panel. The I guess was that virtual reality and architecture?
Yeah, it was virtual reality and architecture and home and placemaking. This was with Andrea Yon-Kojikaru of Numina out of Germany. They do real and virtual architecture. This was with Caroline Runningwolf. I've known her and her husband Michael for a long time. They do incredible advocacy for Native populations. And then Jessica Outlaw, who I've actually studied for years because she's done these amazing studies on virtual spaces and the psychology of architecture and things like how people feel very similarly in virtual spaces as real spaces. And there's certain cues you can take from that when you design virtual spaces, but there's of course things you want to take advantage of when you're not bound by the laws of physics inside these virtual spaces. And I'll be honest, I'll reveal something here. The main reason I kicked off this panel discussion was I'm friends with Jessica and we've hung out before, and I'm friends with Andrea. We hung out in London, and then I found out when Andrea and I were both speaking in London that her and Jessica, very good friends in totally different time zones, and they'd never gotten to meet each other. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be nice if I could like find a way to like allow them to meet each other? And so
Yeah.
yes, so I thought like let's try to do a panel discussion together. When he brought Caroline on, and then we all got to meet each other, hang out, and of course have this wonderful discussion, which was lovely. Also, we ended up opening the panel discussion with a land acknowledgement, which was incredible and really powerful. And I've never been physically present for those. Like usually for land acknowledgments, I hear that kind of thing like on a podcast or something like that. And
Yeah.
the performance and the statement that kicked off our whole panel was really powerful. And I think it set the tone for a much more, I'm going to say, somber and serious discussion about real and virtual places and what makes them meaningful compared to the theater one, which was a little bit more lighthearted and playful. And the way that we set this up, by the way, again, I had to do some homework. We all had two images that we brought with us. We brought an image of a real place that was meaningful to us and a virtual place that was meaningful for us. And for the virtual place, for example, Jessica has spent a lot of time in alt space, and so she gave this beautiful and kind of heartbreaking, obituary for alt space closing down, because that happened like that
Oh
morning
yeah, that's right.
before our
Yeah.
panel. So that was very, very effective. And great questions from the audience. And I was very impressed by how deep that discussion got, especially on this question of like, can a virtual space that you've designed in Unreal Engine, for example, be as meaningful to you
Hmm.
as an actual physical space, which is very interesting because like
Yeah, that's interesting.
what are we in right now?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean,
We're in a
it
bit
is
of a
interesting.
virtual
Like,
Unreal space. Yeah.
yeah, that is interesting because yeah, just, there's some things that obviously, at least with current technology, you can't get like you can't touch, you can't sort of you can't spend too much time in it. Like there's some sort of it's an interesting trade off. Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I'm sort of thinking about it now and I'm like, well, on the one hand, there's things you just can't do yet. Maybe we'll get there with VR in a virtual sort of space, but on the flip side, there are things you can do in a virtual space in a way that's not really like you said, bound by the laws of physics. Like you could do sort of some of the things that inspire awe or wonder. You could play on nostalgia in a certain way that like maybe is not possible with like a physical space. But yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious. Yeah, what were people's thoughts there? Like, what were the sort of like arguments around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a really healthy debate about, and I say us on the panel, but then also everyone outside who spoke for a long time with us afterwards about what are the guidelines? What are the guidelines for making a space compelling? Um,
Yeah.
when should you make something feel familiar? We talked a lot about things like cognitive load for
Hmm.
how hard it is to actually like process something that feels completely new. If you just shoot someone into a virtual world and it's totally abstract space, or let's do the polar opposite. You're suddenly just in the middle of like a dance club and there's 1,000 people around you.
Yeah.
Jessica, I'll steal a line from her in one of her blogs where she said, it's so weird when people just drop you into the middle of a social environment. And then you have to get your bearings and figure out what the rules are and where the people are. And like the closest thing to that in the real world is if you've been like kidnapped and then someone pulls the bag off your head and you're suddenly like in a warehouse and you're trying to process all that. So like it's
Yeah.
kind of like that
Or you're doing
whenever
some
someone spawns you
really
there. Yeah.
or you're doing some really awesome slash terrible drugs, I guess. Yeah, you're just like, oh,
Right. Either
I
one.
just
Yeah.
woke up.
Awesome
It's a
drugs
rave.
or terrible drugs. Yeah. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, just the discussions about the thing that interests me the most is like, when should we be designing spaces that take full advantage of what you can do in the digital medium entirely
Yeah.
virtually? And when do you want something to feel familiar and remind people of home or childhood or other spaces they've been to, or, actually a real digital twin of a place that people will never actually get to visit, but now you're providing that service of letting them see that. Because I think there's a good analogy to be made here with like film and the fact that in the early days of film, we didn't have the cinematography language yet for cuts and wide shots and close-ups and montage and all that. And so, there was a certain way to just watch a film a lot of times in a single long take. Shout out again to something like Amaze VR, which can do that very, very well. But
Yeah.
then over time, we did start to learn the literacy of that cinematic language, and now we can watch a movie like Mad Max Fury Road, for example, and we can understand it pretty well, even though there's 1,000 things happening in all these cuts. Versus if you were to show someone from 1910 Mad Max Fury Road, they would be very confused, and not just because of the subject matter of the movie, but just because they wouldn't know how to deal with understanding all those cuts. And so I think with something like virtual spaces and virtual architecture, and honestly, I'll tie this back to like virtual theater and virtual live events. Right now, we need to give people these anchors of the familiar so that it makes sense to them.
Yeah.
But over time, I want to believe we can venture more and more into the things that are only possible in these virtual
Yeah.
environments, and really, do some really outlandish things that actually will get to that point where there's not much cognitive load to that, and people can just
Yeah.
jump right in and experience it and have a great time.
Yeah, there's some analogies to sort of the way in the early days of mobile design, there's
Mm-hmm.
especially Apple like leaned heavily into skeuomorphism because they're
Yeah.
trying to sort of give familiar, like have a sense of familiarity because you are already doing something pretty new, which is like, hey, you have this like supercomputer, in your pocket, and it can access the internet and all this stuff. And so they had that early on, and then like over, yeah, because I wonder, could you have shipped the current something like the current flat design, let's call it, which I have my gripes with, back when mobile first launched? And I think maybe the answer is it would have been really confusing because people were just starting to learn like gestures and swiping, and like obviously like the tech forward people would figure it out, but now that like they've got people that have enough experience with it, now it's like, okay, we can jump into this new type of design, whether you like it or not. It's functional, at least, even though you're people, because people have had 10 plus years to kind of train up on it, on these like multi-touch and sort of these concepts. And so maybe that same thing will apply in VR and even XR, where we'll start to like get used to certain things, like, oh yeah, it makes sense to do like this certain gesture to pull up this thing, or everyone's used to like, hey, you got to do a quick setup thing when you first put on a headset because it's got to learn its environment or something. But yeah, that'll be fascinating to see.
Yeah, those are great examples, and I'm just really looking forward to more exploration there, because I do feel like, pretty quickly VR, a lot of things were making people feel sick, and so very quickly people are like, guidelines, things to do, things not to do, and those were good, but some of those rules got established a little too quickly, and I don't know
Yeah.
how many of them should be foundational. Again, I'll bring up Amaze VR. People say never move the camera without someone's permission. Generally
Yeah.
good guideline. There are examples like this where it's doing a phenomenal job of actually, making you feel like you're in a sixth off experience, even though you're not, and it actually feels very comfortable. So, I always think of these things more like guidelines than actual rules, to quote a famous Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
That's awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it sounds like an awesome roundup of South by. I'm actually really sad that I didn't make it. I was planning on being there, but sadly some sickness and family
Uh,
stuff. So next year for sure.
yeah. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking too, as we were discussing like virtual spaces, is it's so different when you meet someone in the real world, like at South by Southwest, who you've never met before or only interacted with through Twitter or even like through a Zoom video. Like before you and I actually met in person, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think we'd ever had like an embodied spatial experience with each other.
No, no,
And
that's true.
for the people that I have interacted with in VR chat, in alt space, in Unreal Engine multiplayer experience, that feels very different. Like there's something about getting a sense of how someone like holds himself, their posture, eye contact, that
Huh.
I think makes people feel much more naturally comfortable with each other when they meet in the real world. And so I had the most profound version of that experience finally meeting a bunch of members of the Ferryman Collective. And this is a group that came out of similar places to me on the VR theater side, but they have taken this vision that they have for the future of virtual theater and run with it. And they're cranking out a bunch of content. And they were doing a piece called Finding Willie at South by Southwest this year, which was a collaboration with the team Gioi Immersive, who were kind of my shepherds when I was in Korea back in October. So that was very cool. But I'd already, of course, seen the people in Korea in real life and then have since seen them in virtual reality. But the Ferryman Collective, so people like Stephen Butchko and Deirdre Lyons and Witten Frank and Braden Roy, these are all people who I've spent a lot of time with in virtual environments, mostly seeing them as performers. My son, who's 7 years old, by the way, loves Deirdre. He saw her a bunch of times perform in The Tempest and The Underpresents, and the way that relationship developed over time was really profound. And so just to be able to like meet her, for example, in person and like thank her face to face for like what an impact she's had on my oldest child was really cool. And the experience they were doing there was also really neat. It was in VR chat, but something I'm learning, and I found this talking to a few people who had any kind of live experience going there, is that there is a profound need for anyone who's trying to do live events or theatrical events or even concerts to a certain degree to have an easy to use platform, some kind of easy way to actually create these shows. And I
Hmm.
talked about this a little bit in my GDC talk last year. That the social platforms people are using for these things, like VR chat, there's not really a major Unreal Engine social platform except for maybe Helios, but they're not. I mean, we can say Fortnite, but
Yeah,
Fortnite
yeah.
won't let you
That's probably the
create
biggest one.
your
Yeah,
own concert. Yes, and
yeah,
so what I would love to be more involved with, and I keep telling people this, is I want to help build a platform that really caters itself toward putting on these kinds of events and
hmm.
provides the right kind of hierarchy, because if you're running a show, you want to be able to dictate so much about the rules of what can and can't happen there. And
Yeah, yeah,
generally social platforms are trying to say like we're all equal here, man. Where it's a democracy,
yeah,
and like
yeah.
you can't mute me unless I'm doing something really terrible. But if
Right.
you're putting on the show, like yeah, you do want to be able to mute the whole audience sometimes and be like, hey, we
Yeah.
got performers talking right now. So
Right,
anyway,
right.
just a quick little detour to say like I thought meeting the Ferryman Collective in person was amazing, and I really want to give them an Unreal Engine platform for live events that's better than what they can do right now in
Yeah.
VR chat. So I'm putting that out as like a personal goal, and I
Yeah.
hope if
That's
we're
awesome.
talking again in 6 months or a year, I can say like, look, I've done it. Here it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that yeah, you're right. There are some like there's certain like concepts there, and I mean, frankly, even like payment, right? Like if you build in a way for people that are putting on those events to just get money, collect payments for it, whatever that happens to be, that would be. I feel like that'd be a big step. I haven't really seen that quite yet. There's that new Fortnite creator. You can
Yeah.
like build some stuff for Fortnite, but I don't know if that quite would let you. It doesn't really let what you do what you're describing. Just the
So,
creation. Sorry.
so great transition. I think we should talk a little bit about GDC, including the announcement of Fortnite Creator, which I have been playing a little bit in. You did not attend GDC, right?
I did not, sadly, no.
So what? Well, I'll start by asking you what did you catch from the GDC announcements, and what struck you, including something like Fortnite Creator?
I mean, I think that yeah, that stood out for sure. I mean, obviously the Unreal Engine, or like the epic reveals of some of the Unreal Engine. I guess it would be from 5.2 and some of the stuff they're working on with generative AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The demo they showed of the of like, hey, here's like they seeded like a couple square meters of like a island, I guess, or whatever, and then
Yeah.
the entire rest of it just filled in automatically. Like that was insane.
Procedurally. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know if that's using sort of machine learning, but I would assume so. But it could be something more sort of procedural, as you mentioned. And then the other thing was the record feature, or like the sort of post process smoothed out facial and like sort of body animate. I guess mostly facial animation via live, not, sorry, not live kits.
Live link.
What's it called? Live Link. Yes, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
That was pretty phenomenal. Like that, I mean, that's actually something that I would love to. I want to explore, integrate into Light Twist someday, soon, because yeah, just it looked amazing. Like, just imagining that level of fidelity from just an iPhone for facial capture, where it looks like, it basically looks as good as, let's say, facial capture, like the best facial capture you could get like 5 years ago on anything, right? Like, it just looked incredible. And so I see that being like a huge factor in helping like democratize this whole content creation pipeline. But obviously for games, but also just for video. So those are two things that really stood out to me. Really, was anything else? I think those are the two main ones that, from the Unreal Engine specific stuff, I should say.
Yeah, yeah, the GDC announcements from Unreal are always phenomenal, and I found it terribly ironic that last year was my very first time ever going to GDC, and it was also a year where Epic Games just like completely skipped it. There were a few people there, but not many at all. And then I'm hearing about all the amazing parties that Epic
Yeah.
Games is throwing at GDC, and yeah, unfortunately missed it all. Oh, and I did mean to mention that there was a very small presence of Unreal Engine people at South by Southwest who were on panels and whatnot, and they actually hosted an Epic Games party that I was invited to. And it sounds like amazing, amazing people were there. And unfortunately, it was one of those like FOMO things where there were too many things going on that night. I ended up at a different party, and it was a great party, but like, I'm like, oh God, it would have been so great to go to the Epic Games one. So I think a good rule of thumb to the world and all of our listeners is, if you have the opportunity to go to any event thrown by Epic Games, go to an event thrown by Epic Games. They're always phenomenal.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Yeah, yeah, I'm sad I missed that as well. Yeah, let's see what else. Anything else that stood out to you at GDC?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just roll out a little bit more some of the things you touched on. So MetaHuman Animator looks amazing, and I have to be a little careful about what I say about this because I do have access to MetaHuman Animator now as a
Oh,
partner of Epic Games. So I'm not going to comment on my personal experience using it, but I do think I can comment on how I reacted to what I saw. So seeing how quickly that video footage with like depth mapping and using lidar or whatever was able to be processed and turned into something that looked far better than really any of the metahuman animation I've seen so far, which a
yeah,
lot of it does look good. I thought that was incredible. And I'm involved with a number of pieces that are trying to be narrative pieces that work both in a live context as well as an on-demand context. And so this is perfect for that, because let's take, for example, like our Christmas Carol show that we do every December. So we can do the live link version where it's all happening live and we're getting the best data we can from that. But
yeah,
what we can also do now is record all that and
yeah,
process it. And my understanding is there
exactly.
is like AI being used to like get
Oh
like
yeah,
the
for
tongue
sure.
movement very correct. Like you can't do that
Yeah, yeah,
live, so that does take some processing. There's a lot of stuff going on for the metahuman DNA to like match your face with the character there, and just the speed of all that. Like I'm sure that will be live in, probably knowing Epic, like a year or two, but even just the speed of processing that right now is really phenomenal. And I
yeah.
just can't believe
That
how
was insane.
quickly Epic has gone from like acquiring cubic motion and three lateral and merging that with their own digital humans team and cranking out these tools that aren't just tech demos, like they're actually usable things for the common Unreal Engine user. And I love it. And it's
Yeah,
free. Like the fact that you can go onto metahuman.unrealengine.com or something like that and access a cloud computer and build your own metahumans that way for no cost is pretty amazing.
yeah, yeah. The other one other thing I wanted to call out that was kind of really interesting to me was the NVIDIA CEO Jensen
Yeah.
uh, brought up. He said something interesting to me that was I was kind of surprised he would say this, which was, he had this thing of like the statement of like every pixel will be generated, not rendered.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that pretty interesting. I don't know if obviously, like of all the people in the world, he's probably one of the people that has like the best insight on this stuff because he's building literally the picks and shovels of the AI game engine world, with Nvidia. And so, but that was really fascinating to me because I'm wondering. I could definitely see it getting there. Like essentially, like there could be a future where a lot of the you could still have a game engine, kind of under the hood doing some stuff, but maybe the sort of game engine objects all the way, sort of taking that as input and out to the final rendered pixels could be a generative layer. Like once that's running in real time, it's not crazy. It's not crazy to me because the quality is getting better and better on some of the offline sort of image based stuff. Like Midjourney 5 is insanely good, but yeah, I was curious what you thought of that because that was a really it was an interesting statement that I wouldn't have expected it to make. Um, but yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA is such an interesting company for a lot of reasons. Like, I think all the time about how they are actively trying to like help Unreal and Unity, and then also kind of compete with them in certain ways with their own like fork of
Yeah,
Unreal Engine and their own, Omniverse stuff. But also, like what you're bringing up, it just reminds you that NVIDIA kind of gets to play both sides of this battle because their
yeah,
graphics cards and their technology and their software kind of powers whoever wins this, like they're still
yeah,
going to come out ahead, which is kind of fascinating. And so in some cases, like they might put some of their other departments out of business,
yeah,
which
yeah,
I'm sure there has to be precedent for that. Like, God, can you think of like
yeah.
sometime
Apple
Apple or
Apple does
someone?
that.
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, they're cannibalizing their older products for sure. And yeah, I think I guess in their case, they don't care as long as it's if on the one side people are using CUDA, on the other side they're using DLS, like different drivers for
yeah.
rendering and stuff in game engines. But it definitely seems like there's this in general. What I'm seeing is like this convergence of uh, render, game engine type rendering and what's called computer vision. So like Nerf is a good example where you're sort of seeing this like forward. You're applying some of the same techniques of like graphics in some sense in reverse to reconstruct the scene in this sort of compressed sort of machine learning format. But and there's a bunch of different companies that are now working on porting those to Unreal, where you render,
Mhm.
you can render a Nerf in real time in Unreal, and then
Yeah.
and the same thing's happening with like I could see the same thing kind of happening with generative AI as well, where you start to build these like there's this really interesting efforts around control nets, combining that with things like stable diffusion. So that's something that we're exploring at Light Twist is what are some different ways you can use a game engine to kind of control something like these generative AI rendering systems essentially. And so yeah, I'm just really interested to see how these things come together. Like how do things like Nerf get integrated into game engines and Unreal specifically, obviously, and then same with generative stuff because I have to imagine Epic's thinking about it too.
Yeah, I'm sure. You have to, and that's also just a transition back into like the Fortnite creator thing. That's why some of these announcements are I think, giving us a lot of interesting clues for where Epic might be headed.
Yeah,
Fab was a really excithon announcon. So for those who
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know, this
Shout
is
out to
like a
Albin.
new
Yeah,
marketplace. Yeah, exactly. Shout out Albin. I did a WebXR hackathon at the old Sketchfab offices years ago before they were acquired by
nice.
Epic. And on my team, just to shout it out, was Thomas Vinbal, who also now has gained notoriety as the indie developer behind Cubism, which is a great VR puzzle game. But him and I made a WebXR experience that was actually kind of like an educational tool where you could very easily like have a teacher who's running the class and could call on people. And we just tried to get like the basic environment of a well-functioning classroom working in WebXR. Anyways, Sketchfab, uh, Bridge from Quixel, the Unreal Engine Marketplace, unifying all these things into like one place, including like
Yeah,
the ability to purchase assets, the ability to preview assets, the ability to drag and drop them directly into Unreal or the Unreal Engine Fortnite editor is really exciting just in terms of the ease of use here. And my benchmark for all this stuff is always like, what does this enable my kids to do? Because I'm always trying to get my kids involved in VR and Unreal Engine and creation. And,
Yeah.
a few weeks ago, I might have talked about it on the last podcast. Like, I was letting them design their own landscapes in Unreal Engine and showing them how to use like the ramp function and how to change their player pawn. So like now it's a driving game, now it's a running character, now it's VR.
Nice.
And to go from that to all of a sudden like the tools in Unreal Engine Fortnite editor is night and day. Like, I
Yeah.
really had to soften the onboarding for them to do certain things in Unreal, but they picked up on some of the stuff in the Unreal Engine Fortnite editor so quick, especially once I showed them Fab and like, hey, you can type in the thing you want, tree, rock, car, whatever, and here's all these things, and you can just drag it into your environment and move it around. And then when we got to that point where it's like, cool, kids, you've made this volcano island that has like helicopters and cars and guards and all these random 3D assets you got from the internet. And now we're hitting publish, and now we're going to go play this on our PlayStation 5. And
Yeah.
the speed of which we're able to do that now, it's almost unthinkable for like the fact that we could be here. Like 2 years ago, if I had seen the video of us doing this over the course of like 30 minutes, I wouldn't have believed that was possible. It's really phenomenal.
That's amazing. Yeah, it feels like yeah, I think like our kids' generations, yeah, it's gonna be like it's gonna be like an infinite creative playground. It feels like it'll be limited only by your imagination at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, I'm curious, since we're both fathers, like how are
Yeah,
you approaching just the general, I want to say like technology side of everything? Like, when do you
yeah,
decide like, yes, it's okay to engage with this passively or interactively or as a learning tool or in whatever context? Because you of course also have
yeah,
access to a lot of these tools and technologies.
yeah. I mean, my kids are pretty young, so they're 3 and 5 right now, so they're a little bit young
Yeah.
for like you know. So yeah, we've generally tried to limit them on like TV and screen time in general, so they don't really have their own devices or anything like that yet. But yeah, I mean, it's something I've thought about. Like, I'm like, okay, at what point do we start to do that? I'm trying to steer them more into creative things. And so like, yeah, I've had my oldest and youngest even like help me with like, just play around with some like generative AI stuff. So I'll be like, hey, let's type in
Oh,
some prompts
cool.
for Mid Journey or for Dolly 2, and just kind of like just kind of exploring there. But it's still early. Yeah, I think I'll probably yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have any great advice there yet. Maybe in a couple years.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always find myself thinking about is just how normal this is going to feel to our kids in a way where it's still kind of baffling to
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
The example I go to a lot is like our phones, I think, are going to seem so strange to especially the generation that comes, in the next 20 years. And
yeah,
maybe Apple will be a big part of this. I just heard that they like may or may not actually be releasing their headset or announcing their headset in June. Maybe it's pushed back for the upteenth time. But of
yeah,
course, this notion that like if you got your iPhone, if you're walking down the street and there's a restaurant and you're like, oh, hey, I wonder what that restaurant is, like maybe it's closed down and there's no menu on the door. So you like Google the restaurant and you're pulling up the menu and you're looking at reviews and you're
yeah,
doing all that on this tiny little screen in front of you. But of course, it's inevitable that pretty soon that will all be spatial. It'll all be contextual. You'll be able to
yeah,
walk down a street with some kind of AR glasses on. And if those glasses know that you want to see restaurant reviews and prices and things like that, you'll see it
yeah,
popping up on top of the facades of these different buildings. And so
yeah,
a couple generations from now, the idea that we had to like look at this little black mirror in our hands to get that contextual information, that's going to
yeah,
seem really crazy. And it's just interesting to
yeah,
try to view the world through our kids' eyes that way.
yeah. And I think even like the one sort of way, there's this one concept of like things that super rich people do just kind of get like commoditized and gotten get to a place where like regular people can access them often. And so in some ways, like I kind of think this if you think about like billionaires, they've got like personal assistants, right? And so
Yep.
they're not walking down the street, even if they had an AR headset like looking at reviews, they've got like they're like, hey, here's the one restaurant you should go to, right? And so
Yeah, that's
I see
right.
something like that where it's like
Mm.
you get this like personalized, like always on, like hyper vigilant, like watching your calendar, knows where you are. Like obviously there's privacy concerns, but like Someone's going to crack the code on that, or probably a couple of different companies, and that's going to be a huge thing where you have like yeah, it's like you get this personal agent that's even doing all this stuff on your behalf, and it's like, hey, like, yeah, figure out a good time to meet up with this person, or that restaurant I went to last night was like meh, so next time let's not do, whatever, let's not do this type of cuisine on these days or something like that, right? So yeah, it'll be a fascinating future, and I'm really excited for how all this also plays into like creativity, because we're already seeing it now, and like obviously it's something we're working on in one way at Light Twist, but a bunch of other companies are. But this world of like, yeah, like at what point will a Hollywood film be made by by a person in their basement, right? Like how, or at least like when will it be the equivalent sort of level of quality where you're like, okay, you made this video, you made this movie, it cost you, you know, $1,000, and it's like on par with like the highest budget movie ever of like 10 years ago, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I see a pretty clear shot to how like in the next 10 years, maybe probably five or less, maybe I'm even underestimating it. Could you make Jurassic Park with you know for under $1,000? Like probably.
Sure. Well, I don't have any particular shout outs this week besides the
Yeah,
South by Southwest stuff, but
yeah,
Corridor Crew is really a YouTube channel everyone should be taking a look at because
yeah,
they're
yeah,
doing those kinds of experiments. I think one of the ones they did was literally let's try to recreate one of the scenes from Jurassic Park, like using, whatever off the shelf tools we can grab. I think they used Unreal Engine for that.
yeah,
So, that kind of stuff combined with, yeah, exactly, like ChatGPT and the AI tools we have now. And also just like, I want to say the people side of this is important too, because it's not that people or kids are smarter now. They just have access to so many more resources than they did before. So anyone
yeah,
can find the right YouTube videos or resources to become a really talented VFX artist. And you
yeah,
compound that with all these, AI assisting systems and software pieces out there. And like just what people can do is really mind blowing. And I'm constantly baffled by the creativity. Whenever I get to like be a guest critic for universities at the end of the semester, there's always at least one student where I'm like, "You're like 19 years old. How did you do this?"
yeah,
And I like that. I like that feeling of constantly being about to be obsolete.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's great. It's an interesting field. Yeah, it's an interesting time. It's like these are, yeah. I kind of consider the my sort of prediction is 2020 to 2050 is hardcore cyberpunk era, and then hopefully we get to Star
Sure.
Trek after that. But we're gonna have to go through
Utopia.
some slight dystopia utopia battles, I think, in the next 30 years probably.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully we'll be on the right side of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, it's just as always, awesome to be on here, and yeah, thanks for the recap on South by, and yeah, just always great to be here, Alex.
Yeah, this is really fun. Because is there anything that you want to plug? Anything that's coming up, travel or events or stuff you want people to know about?
No, nothing specific. Just yeah, just nothing
Where can
specifically
people
right
find
now.
you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm on Twitter, probably way too much at Vikas Reddy, or I'm at Vikas at lighttwist.com. So yeah, if you're looking for a virtual studio, if you're looking to experiment with some early software, always happy to talk there. Or even you're a startup founder looking for some feedback, especially if you're early on in your career. Like I'm always happy to help there too. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah, Vikas has a huge wealth of knowledge, and I would encourage anyone who wants to take him up on that offer. Please do it, and you'll be better for it. I'm going to plug one thing that I didn't talk about it because it's not Unreal. It actually is a Unity project, but we flew right from Austin to Tennessee to film in 360 video and capture with depth kit volumetrically an incredible live show called La Pasión Segunda San Marco, which is like kind of the Christ story as told from St. Mark's perspective. You don't need to be religious at all to appreciate how powerful this piece is. There's like a Latin fusion music thing going on, and the percussion is incredible. The dancing is incredible. There's a capoeira dancer who we captured with Move AI, just using an iPhone and a couple Android devices. We did all these scans with Polycam and things like that. We captured this live event that only a couple hundred people actually saw live. We captured the dress rehearsal, 2 shows, and then a patch session where we could be like right up on stage, right up close to some of the performers. We also did digital scans of the performers, again, using things like Polycam and Luma AI. And now it is our responsibility to take this piece, which is done. These performers will never be together again, and turn this into something that the rest of the world can appreciate. And we want it to be accessible. We want there to be a VR version. We want like a WebGL version, a YouTube version. And I feel profoundly responsible now for honoring what legitimately is one of the most powerful live performances I've seen in my life.
That's awesome. Congrats. Yeah, congrats on that. It sounds like an amazing thing. So I'll keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, that's all my plug is, like, keep an eye out for that. I think we'll have at least like a trailer coming up soon, and yeah, just shout out to the Gateway Chamber Orchestra and everyone who helped make this happen. And the only reason I'm lucky enough to be involved with it is I helped them secure a Google grant, and so as part of the Google grant, it's like they're doing the live show and then they want to expand the audiences and do all these other things. So this stuff is really exciting. And I will say, because this is the Unreal Engine podcast, if Unreal Engine starts to have better volumetric capture capabilities, that is
Mm,
going to allow us to do more of this kind of stuff inside of Unreal Engine. So maybe we'll see some progress there soon.
awesome.
Cool. Okay. Thanks again, Vikas. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks as always to our producer, Alan Scott, who's making all the bells and whistles and knobs work behind the scenes. And we hope everyone enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time. Maybe I won't be here, but Jacob will be here. We'll start mixing it up more. We can
Yeah.
do whatever we want with the show. It's going to be a good time. I'm going to put on my Jacob hat for a moment and remind you to like and subscribe, comment, download us on whatever platforms you can, share it with your friends, and there we go. Jacob's much better at plugging the show than I am. Hoorah. So thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.